I returned from the hospital to find my room turned into a gym. She won't remember anyway, my son said, but I did, including the $45.00. They forgot I still controlled. I returned home tired and hollowed by 3 weeks in the hospital, battered by infection and weakened further by complications with my heart. I had imagined my first steps back would bring comfort. I had pictured myself curling up on my old bed, the familiar quilt wrapped around me, my hand resting on the lamp base, its light soft and yellow. I wanted to look at the framed wedding photo that sat beside the lamp. Me and Henry, smiling under summer skies. That memory was my anchor. But reality was a razor. The hallway smelled of disinfectant and emptiness. I dragged my feet toward my bedroom door, clutching the sheets of the bed I had slept in for decades, each crease a chapter of my life. I opened the door and my heart stopped. Whoever drew the curtain on my sanctuary turned it into a rudderless room of strangers. The bed was gone, no mattress, no quilt, no pillows. The wooden frame was dismantled and gone too. My wardrobe lay open and hollow, bare hangers swinging like mute witnesses to absence. The wallpaper looked as though it tried to weep in the corners. I recognized nothing. Nothing but a treadmill, its belt shiny and black. A rack of dumbbells heavy as mockery. A full-length mirror reflecting me in horror. And worst, a billboard-sized sign, letters scrawled in bold red marker. Femurs starts here. No old energy allowed. I stood there, half bent, hand to my chest, tasting bile in my mouth. Natalie stepped into the room, straw atop a smoothie protruding carelessly from her hand. She smirked as she took in my face. Her voice was a soft blade. "Oh, she's back? I thought the hospital was going to keep her another week. At least we'd finish the squat rack." Her words were as cold as she was, no warmth, no apology for the years of care I'd given my children, just amusement, just a reminder that I was relegated to a relic. From the living room, Jared appeared. His hair was trimmed, his shirt crisp, but he looked at me as though I were an old photograph, familiar in outline, but with no relevance anymore. "You can sleep in the laundry room," he said, never making eye contact. "It's got a sink and a mat. She barely walks anyway." I swallowed. I looked at him as if I could sink into the floor. Then I forced air into my lungs. This was my room. Natalie laughed. Sweet, cruel, effortless. "Not anymore. You were gone long enough," she said. "We figured you weren't coming back, and if you did, well, it's not like you'd remember anything." Those words knocked something cold and heavy into the pit of my soul. Those were the words of people who had decided I no longer mattered or even existed as a person. I wasn't a person, I was a placeholder, and that hurt more than the bruises they would leave. In a moment that carried no emotion, Natalie's hand shot out. Not in anger, no, that would have been simple. It was more clinical, an experiment, even? Her hand met my cheek, a resounding slap. The night exploded in my ears. I closed my eyes, but everything registered. The sharp red flare that blossomed on my skin, the sudden knock of balance. I staggered and Natalie laughed again, not triumphant, but curious, amused. Then Jared joined in the cruelty. His fingers pinched my arm in a grotesque twist that cracked the skin. A bruise bloomed there, purple and angry. I felt the marrow of my bones murmur in protest, but I stood, breath rattling, heartbeat pulsing. Natalie turned away from me to deliver her verdict to the empty room. "If anyone asks, those bruises are just age." Or maybe she fell again. Didn't she say she was dizzy all the time? Let's hope the nurse notes that. They painted me as a brittle object, a faulty appliance to be safely discarded. Their sadism was careful, calculated. They made sure it looked natural. That was what made it worse. My body, the vessel that had carried life and held me through joys and sorrows, was now assaulted. But even that pain paled against the deeper blow, the rejection, the erasure. I stumbled backward. My fingers found the door jamb and held on, not because I was afraid of falling, but because I felt myself unspooling, unraveling like a ribbon left in the rain. My breath faltered. I heard my heartbeat hammer and thought it might burst, but I did not cry. Some things do not break you, they sharpen you. At some point they left me standing in that wrecked room. I turned away and walked down the hall with steps that were small but counted. That night, I lay on the cold, hard floor of the laundry room. No mattress, no blanket, no pillow. Just sawdust and tile. My eyes stayed open because I could not bear the whisper of sleep. My hand went down to the bruise on my cheek, the purple knot on my arm. I traced them slowly, deliberately, like I was mapping evidence. Even through the pain, I recognized that these wounds were not signs of decay. They were the beginnings of memory, proof that I still felt, I still existed. In the darkness, I whispered to my reflection in the utility closet mirror, to the empty air, to the memory of summers in the garden, candlelit dinners, and Henry's voice calling me home. You think I forgot, but I remember every single thing. After the blow of that cruel slap and the bruise forming like a dark prophecy on my cheek, I crawled into the bathroom where the light was faint and the air smelled of disinfectant. I shut the door quietly, as if I were sealing off the shame of being disregarded. And then I heard it. Natalie's voice over the phone through the bathroom wall. Just loud enough. Once she's in hospice, I caught her saying, her voice relaxed like she was talking about groceries. We can liquidate the last trust fund. She signed it years ago. She won't even know it's gone. The sentence slammed into me harder than any punch. The trust fund she spoke of was something I fought tooth and nail to protect, fought through sleepless nights and paper cuts. Everything I had built with Henry. Everything that represented my life's struggles and legacy. They were planning to dissolve it like sugar and hot lip. I leaned against the cold tile, my legs trembling. But underneath the prickling of old age and bruised pride, I felt something activate, something calm and burning. Pulling myself up, still seeing stars, I dragged my body through the house to my old desk, the desk that had survived every storm, including now. When I slid open the top drawer, dust rose like ghosts on summer air. Inside were the things I'd hidden. Legal documents, trust details, Henry's original drafts in his neat handwriting. My breath caught. I was still the trustee. I still controlled the $45 million 0 cents trust. I had never given that away. They thought I'd lost it. How dare they? I remembered something else too. Something sharper than script and law. That night, years ago, when Jared wanted to blow our savings on Bitcoin dreams, he believed it would solve everything. Natalie had stood in that same room and spits out to me, "You're just sitting on cash while your family drowns. You're dragging us behind your tiny savings." Those words had stung worse than betrayal. Back then, I had let it go with a tight smile. But now they dripped poison, and I realized that no matter how old I was, my fight wasn't over. I found my phone and scrolled through files until I saw a note from my lawyer, confirming the trust status, even telling me there was a trigger reinstatement clause should I ever be incapacitated. I tapped the file and printed the papers with shaking fingers. Trust agreement, my legal authority, updated property rights. Each sheet fell like a promise reborn. In that moment, I made a vow. These children of mine thought they had a woman who would sleep into oblivion, who would doze through the end and fade. But I remembered the stories my father told from the old plantation, about resilience through hard times, about how the ground beneath your feet might shift, but your roots go deep. I took the boxes of papers, documents, recordings, logs, letters, and I carried them to my closet, where I had already packed some essentials earlier. I zipped open my bag and placed them carefully inside, along with my rosary and my good eyeglasses. I didn't know what would come next, but I was stirring. Standing in the hallway, I caught a glimpse of the treadmill through the open door. It wasn't just a machine now. It was a monument to their scorn. But I would not let their contempt define me. I shut the door and walked with purpose toward the front of the house, where the evening light pooled on the front window. Natalie's laughter, still floating behind walls, did not budge my resolve. I took a deep breath, cold air entering, old lungs filling, and whispered, "They think I forgot, but I remember. And now they will remember that I am here." I wasted no time calling my trusted old lawyer, Henry Boland, my silent champion for over 15 years. His number, saved in my phone as Henry, Trust, took me back to days when this house was filled with hope, not heartbreak. When the phone rang, it felt like I was dialing my bones back to life. "Mrs. Elridge," he answered in that familiar deep tone. How are you? I steadied myself. I'm done waiting, I told him. They're trying to wipe my name off everything. You know what to do. Silence cracked the line. Yes, I believe I do. It was all I needed to hear. I hung up and crossed the room that used to hold my vanity, now empty and echoing. I needed to activate the clause Henry and I painstakingly added years ago, the snap-back authority. That clause only kicks in when the trustee faces serious threats to control or personal abuse, and right now I had both. I retrieved the trust agreement from my drawer. The paper felt heavier in my hands than it ever had. I scanned until I found that clause. My eyes pricked. It was still there, clear as day. I scribbled notes in the margin. Snap-back authority invoked due to documented elder abuse, threatened dismantling of trust, and inferred incapacity. I called Henry again. It's happening, I said. He waited a beat and calmly replied, I'm on my way. While I waited, I set up my phone with a hidden recording app angled toward the living room. I knew they'd talk. They always did when they thought no one was listening. Their voices would seal my case. Then I walked to the window, this house, full of wounds, and breathed deeply. These wounds didn't weaken me, they focused me. Once Henry arrived, he carried his briefcase like a shield. We moved to the dining table. I laid out the trust documents, the power of attorney, and my own identity verification files. He nodded, then grabbed his phone and set it to record every supportable step. Together, Henry and I executed the first move, a formal letter to the trust fiduciary, stating that due to a credible threat to my personal safety and control over the trust, the snap-back authority clause is activated. I signed it, tears and determination both staining the ink. While we worked, my phone lay recording Natalie's voice. I heard her say, I'll switch the password after we put Mom in a care facility. She won't know where the money went. Jared chipped in, We'll have everything moved into my name. She's too old to protest. Nursing home is cheaper anyway. My heart pounded. They were ready to erase me. Henry crossed the room and transferred every control back into my trusted hands. Access codes, bank statements, trustee powers. He looked at me and said quietly, You're building calm out of their chaos. Well done. They walked in then, waltzing through the front door like they owned every square inch. Jared carried takeout boxes like trophies. Natalie waved and laughed. I sat up straight. Honey, I said, calm but fierce, I just want you to know, I've taken over the trust again. You're no longer trustees. Don't try to access anything. Natalie choked on her laugh. What are you talking about? They told me. I'm well aware of what was said, I replied. But with Snapback activated, I now have complete control. All trustee duties, authority, and decisions are mine again. Nervous flashes crossed their faces. They demanded proof, yelling that I was losing my mind, that I couldn't remember anything longer than 5 minutes. I took a tape recorder out of my bag, hit play, and their own words sounded through the speakers. Their laughter, their plans, their contempt, all recorded. So many things shattered in that moment. Their denial, their superiority, their smirks. But I stayed quiet. I didn't need to rage. I just looked at them, face soft but steel inside, and whispered, I remember everything. I spent the night awake, my arm still throbbing where Jared's pinch had left a bruise that bloomed like a secret. But my hands did not tremble when daylight came. I had a plan, and hurting strength surged through me. I rose early and dressed quietly, as if slipping into the suit of armor Henry had brought. We sat across the desk from each other, papers spread like a battlefield map. Henry slid me a fresh stack of documents, trust forms, deed transfers, and wire authorization forms. I picked up a pen with calm intent. On the first form, I initiated a transfer directive. All assets in the Martha Elridge Family Trust are hereby reclassified to frozen asset control. These assets are inaccessible, untransferable, and unspendable, except at the sole discretion of Martha Elridge. I signed in bold blue ink and dated it. This freeze didn't just secure the funds. It transformed them into lines of code that anyone, including banks, fiduciaries, lawyers, could not disrupt unless I specifically countersigned again. I was building walls around my legacy. Henry watched silently, then affirmed, legal and airtight. His words grounded me. Then I turned the page. Another form. This one asked for a spend limit. I wrote, $1 million to be used to acquire the property formerly owned by Carter Elridge at 142 Maplewood Drive, with immediate transfer of ownership formed to Safe Harbor Haven, a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting elder adults from abuse. My heartbeat stuttered only once when I signed it, but after that, silence. When the papers were executed, I slipped into the study where I'd stashed the keys to that old house of my parents. That house meant something sacred to me, but it had been abandoned for decades. No one visited, no one cared. It was off the foreclosure lists, quietly saved from the scrap heap of time. Within a single morning, that house belonged to me again, or to Safe Harbor Haven, to be precise. I watched the title transfer finalize on my screen, like a bird finding its way home. I stepped onto the front porch of my current home, hands empty but heart full. The sun caught the window of the treadmill room, that blasted gym, lasting briefly on my cheek. I closed my eyes and breathed the air. I hadn't created a show. I'd made a refuge. When Natalie and Jared barged in hours later, talking about dinner plans and painting over dirt marks on the mat, I was sitting quietly at the dining table. I saw them pass the empty room, but not me. Their heads turned when the email alert came in. Header read, "Notice of frozen asset control, trust inoperable." Their faces went blank as they read each line. They clutched each other. Jared stammered about lawyers and budgets. Natalie tried to scandalize the situation. "This is fraudulent," she screamed. I just looked at them over my coffee, the bruise on my cheek healing. "I wasn't gone," I said softly. "I just needed to be forgotten, long enough to save what wasn't declinable." They looked at me, at the documents, and then at each other. The smugness drained like ink in water. Then door opened softly behind them. A car pulled up. I recognized the logo on the door. Safe Harbor Haven. Volunteers poured in, some infirm, some elderly, all buoyed by the stolen gift of a home they never asked for, but deeply needed. The gym turned into check-in tables. My old bed, now folded and donated to a veterans center. The dumbbells? Donated to youth rehab programs. Natalie insisted on speaking, her voice cracking. "Martha, why? You could have easily said no." I looked at her, my heart heavier but surer. I did say no. I said no to erasing me, and I said yes to protecting us from people who forgot how to love. In the dusk, Safe Harbor Haven hung curtains in the old house, lit lamps. Music and laughter faintly floated through the windows, life where there had been none. I went to the edge of our house, my own empty frame, and smiled. They turned my room into a gym. I turned their greed into a sanctuary. And then I stepped inside, because I wasn't gone yet. I followed Henry's calm instructions, emailed the court-appointed administrator, and copied in Adult Protective Services of Georgia, the mandated agency for elder abuse and exploitation reports in our state. Minutes later, I heard them, a clatter of footsteps and desperate voices, Natalie and Jared crashing into my dining room. They looked at me with faces drained of privilege, mouths opening and closing like trapped fish. "You froze the trust," Jared spat. "The accounts are empty, locked." "What did you do, Mom?" Natalie was trembling, clutching her phone as if it held answers. She said, "We filed for guardianship. You're unfit. How else can we get control?" I gathered myself. This moment, this confrontation was the point of no return. I said with quiet strength, "Go ahead. File for guardianship." They sputtered. "You can't do this," Natalie began. I opened the folder in front of me and pulled out the documents. The trust papers, affirmation of the snapback authority, my notarized mental competency letter from Dr. Hadley, the audio file of their own voices discussing liquefying the trust, and the police report from APS. I placed each item carefully and precisely on the table. A wave of tension slashed through the room as Jared's face flickered red. "This proves I am not incapacitated," I told them. "This proves you plan to steal from me. This is proof of elder financial exploitation, and I have already delivered it to APS, the courts, and even the state attorney general if needed." Their eyes widened in fear. Elder financial exploitation in Georgia is a felony, with penalties up to 20 years in prison and $50,000 0 cents in fines. They realized they had crossed a line. I pressed on. "Georgia law mandates reporting abuse. I reported you. You tried to erase me, My home, my bed, my finances, but I still remember. I was never gone. They recoiled and Natalie's voice trembled. We didn't mean— I shut her down, gently but firmly. It doesn't matter. Intent doesn't erase the damage. You thought I was gone, but I remember everything. Within an hour, legal papers arrived. APS investigators on the porch. Henry had faxed them evidence. Officers spoke to me softly, assured me of my rights. Jared and Natalie were questioned, flustered, sweating. They could not deny the recording, the documentation, or my mental clarity. APS later ruled that I was a fit elder, the property rights under my lawful control, and guardianship was not assigned. Instead, they issued a protection order, forbidding any financial access by my family without court approval. I exhaled, muscle glee, as if decades of pain and fear had drained from me. The room smelled of fresh justice. That night, I sat on my bed, the real bed, returned. I held the framed wedding photo of Henry and me, unsmiling but steady. The bruise on my arm had faded, but its sting reminded me how low they stooped. I whispered into the settled darkness, "You thought I was gone, but I remember everything," and for the first time in months, I felt complete. I woke before dawn the morning of the hearing. The bruise on my arm nearly faded, but still tender, like the memory of betrayal. The house was quiet, but inside me, something galvanized. I dressed carefully, the aged fabric of my dress still carrying a scent of Sunday church and Henry's cologne. I carried only what mattered: the audio recording, the trust documents, the medical certification, and a single framed photo, Henry's and my wedding portrait. Henry drove me to the courthouse. The scent of pine-scented dashboard met my quiet resolve. I clasped his hand as we walked through the doors. The courtroom was alive with anticipation. Reporters, elderly advocates, judges, and legal counsel gathered in hushed murmurs. People I didn't know met me with nods of encouragement, as if they already knew the injustice. When the bailiff called my name, I walked slowly to the stand, my bruise visible on my cheek, proof rather than embarrassment. I stood with Henry by my side, the weight of my years held in posture more than breath. My family, Natalie and Jared, sat on the opposite bench, expressions etched with shock and defiance. They still thought I would collapse. The judge entered in quiet formality, gavel in hand. She was soft-spoken, but commanded presence. "Please be seated," she said, and settled behind her bench. The courtroom filled with tension, awareness, and grief for what had been lost before today. Henry began. Calm, precise, courteous. "Your Honor, today is not a dispute over error or confusion," he said. "This is a clear matter of financial exploitation and elder abuse. Martha Elridge is fully competent, as confirmed by her physician, Dr. Hadley. What we present is the proof." He laid out the documents. The snapback authority clause, the trust documentation reasserting Martha's sole control, the proof of asset freeze, and the financial transfers to Safe Harbor Haven. Then he played the recording. Natalie's voice echoed in the courtroom, her tone casual, twisted, cold. "Once she's in hospice, we can liquidate the last trust fund. She won't even know it's gone." Then Jared added to that chain of cruelty, "We'll switch the password and move everything into my name. She's too old to fight." Martha's heart felt like slow thunder. The judge looked up, eyes sharpening. Henry nodded toward me. I cleared my throat. "Yes," I said. "I heard it. I recorded it. I remember everything." The judge turned to Natalie and Jared. Their faces were gray and taut. Then, with the soft weight of authority, the judge ruled, "I find that not only is Ms. Elridge mentally competent, but the court finds that Natalie and Jared Elridge have engaged in attempted financial exploitation of an elderly, vulnerable adult. Their actions are not protected by filiation or affection. They are crimes of opportunity and greed, masquerading as familial concern." The judge paused. She looked at Martha, then at the empty spot where the bed had been. "Natalie and Jared are hereby stripped of all derivative benefits from the Elridge Family Trust. Furthermore, they are designated to pay compensatory damages to Ms. Elridge in the amount of $250,000, 0 cents, representing mental and emotional harm, and to fund her legal expenses." The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Natalie buried her face in her hands. Jared stared at the wood grain. I stood slowly, tears stinging my eyes, not tears of sadness, but of vindication. I turned and looked at my family, and then at Henry. I cleared my throat and spoke softly. Judge. Not vengeance, but justice. I may have missed this room, that bed, my past life, but today I remember my worth. The judge banged the gavel once, firm, final. Outside the courthouse, they were surrounded by cameras. Natalie's tearful surrender was hollow. I didn't mean. Jared's voice was cracked. Bless you, Mom. But I turned away. The moment had passed. I walked outside, breathing fresh air, past reporters and flashes, with one simple smile. Henry guided me to our car. He did not say much, he didn't have to. I held my bruise-scarred arm lightly and thought of the fight that lasted not only in courts, but in the small decisions I made when they disrespected me. As we drove off, the gym room receded behind us, but I could already imagine it transformed in my mind into a sanctuary for memory and reflection. I said to Henry, quiet as a prayer, stronger than I had felt all those years. They thought I was gone, but I remember everything. I woke the next morning knowing the court had shifted everything. The bruise on my arm ached with reminder that it had been real, and that what had followed was stronger. I dressed and poured myself a cup of coffee, silence streaming in through the kitchen window, sunlight rinsing the room. I sat at the table with Henry, and together we signed the documents that would seal this reversal. I would transform the remaining balance of my trust into something purposeful and unassailable. I called it the Martha Witness Fund, a watchdog for the vulnerable elderly, a sword against exploitation, and a beacon for those who feel forgotten. It would fund investigations, legal defense, public awareness campaigns, and patient advocacy. Under its charter, only cases of verified elder abuse or financial exploitation would receive support. The application process would be transparent, and recipients would know that the fund stood for justice, not sentiment. I signed the foundational papers, my handwriting steady, clear. I heard the pen stroke, here. This is rewriting the story. That afternoon, a film crew arrived at my door. They were from a national morning show, interested in a human interest story of resilience. I rose, dressed in the same modest dress as the court day, and let them follow me through the rooms that had nearly erased me. The gym walls stood bare. That room now felt empty and judgmental. I stood in the doorway, sunlight filtering through the glass, and began my interview. They asked me, "Why tell your story publicly after all you've gone through?" I looked into the camera and said, "So no one else faces silence." In that moment, I became the voice for the voiceless. My words flowed, how they erased everything tangible about me, how I found the law in the darkness, and how I chose to channel the trust's remaining dollars into protecting people like me. I didn't mention family names. I spoke of universal love, value of memory, the dignity of aging. The camera panned across my wedding photo, then to the bruise fading beneath my sleeve. The turnout was immediate. Social media lit up. Calls came from advocacy groups, from law enforcement agencies wanting to support. Within days, local and national networks picked up the story. I appeared again on a televised panel with elder rights advocates and lawmakers. Sometimes I sat quietly. Sometimes I spoke. I spoke of Georgia's Adult Protective Services phone line and how everyday people could call 1-800-665-55-AGING to report elder abuse. In the weeks that followed, the Martha Witness Fund helped a nursing home resident recover stolen money, organized workshops teaching people how to spot abuse indicators, and funded legal fees in a landmark case that changed elder care regulations in the state. The fund already had life. One afternoon, I stood outside the old house we'd donated to Safe Harbor Haven. Its windows glowed with life, laughter, candlelight. This house had become a memorial to care, not cruelty. Volunteers greeted me. An elder woman came to me, tears damp in her eyes, and said, "Because of you, I have my home back." My heart broke and grew at once. I looked at the bungalow's front steps and spoke softly. We started a healing, not a fight. The woman took my hand, and I felt hope bloom. This morning I unlocked the door to the old gym, a space that once smothered me in disregard. The faint scent of sweat and resentment still lingered, but I carried forward something stronger, purpose. With gentle hands I removed the weights and wiped them clean, not to touch them again. I rolled up the treadmill belt as if tucking away a bad memory. I arranged the foundation of what I would call the memory room, my signature of peace. I brought in wooden stands for old photographs, Books I had hidden in the attic, journals I'd written in painstaking cursive over decades. On one wall, I placed a portrait of Henry and me on our wedding day. On another, pictures of newborn Jared, Christmas cookies on the floor, a garden full of marigolds, tiny blooms I'd planted 4 generations back. I added vintage books, his mathematics textbooks, my poetry anthologies, our children's picture books. Every shelf felt like placing a life gently back on its own foundation. Later that afternoon, I received word via my attorney. Natalie had lost her job. Her employer dropped her charges based on the elder abuse scandal. The public outcry toward her involvement in the plot to exploit me was swift and severe. Jared, meanwhile, had no access to credit, no reputation left to leverage. He now relied on disability payments and charity to get by. I walked into the memory room and turned the sign around to read the same words I'd spoken so long ago in my mind. They thought I forgot, but I remembered justice. I stood beneath those words until sunshine poured through the window, illuminating the shelves of memory. I touched one of the old books, and it felt like holding a heart. That evening, I appeared on a local morning program. Instead of stories of crime, they wanted a story of healing. They filmed me in the memory room, trailing hands over the marigold photo, the vows of marriage, Henry's wild pen in the margins of my poetry. The cameras never lingered on the gym that was erased, only on the artifacts that remained. They asked what justice looked like now. I smiled. Justice doesn't thunder in courtrooms. It whispers in memories restored, dignity reclaimed, rooms made right. Days later, I was invited to speak at a public event celebrating elder justice initiatives. I stepped onto the stage, a hush falling over the crowd. I wore a simple blouse and my voice was quiet. Aging isn't about less than. It's about years written into our bones. For a while, I lost room, respect, memory. But I found justice, and I found a way to keep it. We are not meant to be erased. Applause rose softly. It felt like music. A neighbor, an old widower named Mr. Kimball, knocked one afternoon. He brought jars of apricot jam. We shared tea and watched grandchildren chase dandelion petals through the yard. He said, "That memory room, it saved something in me too, Martha. A reminder that there is someone who remembers." My heart lifted. I held the jar tightly, thinking how love remains when memory remains. Weeks turned into months, and the memory room became a quiet center for storytelling, refuge, memory workshops. Seniors from nearby towns brought photos and letters. Children came to hear stories about marigolds and mathematics. The house thrummed again, with living, not loss. Sometimes I would pause at the top of the staircase and look down, remembering the night of my return and the bruises that made me feel invisible. I breathed deeply. This home was mine, restored by memory, justice, and protective love. I walked to the window overlooking the garden, sunlight brushing the portraits and journals below. I called softly. I didn't stop remembering, and now this place remembers too. When I closed my eyes, I felt at peace. Not erased, but celebrated. Not forgotten, but rewritten. And for once, that was enough closure, enough strength, enough love to carry forward. They thought I would fade into a quiet corner of irrelevance, that I would spend my days staring out a window with a blanket on my knees. But what came after the storm wasn't weakness. It was peace, with steel in its spine. My mornings now begin with light, soft and golden, streaming through lace curtains. The gym equipment is long gone. In its place, a reading chair. A bookshelf stacked with journals and letters from women I have never met, but who say I gave them courage. On the wall, framed photos, me as a child, my wedding day, my first teaching job, and now, the day I testified. That smile, that was the smile of someone who remembered everything. I wake early, as I always have. My bones still ache, but they move with purpose. I brew my coffee slowly now. I take time to grind the beans. I let the dog nuzzle my knee as I pour. The dog, yes, still here, older, slower, but loyal, just like me. Sometimes I receive letters, handwritten, typed, emailed, from strangers. A granddaughter who witnessed her grandmother cry for the first time. A nurse who quit a job at a facility after reading my story. A young man who said he never respected his grandma until he saw what we can survive. I joined a community board, not for politics, but for change. I meet with young women starting their own families, reminding them of the value of patience, of memory, of asking about stories instead of assuming silence equals simplicity. I started mentoring 2 women who escaped elder abuse. One of them now leads a hotline team in Florida. Natalie and Jared. I hear things. That Jared had to sell his car, that Natalie works customer service somewhere in a headset with no name tag. I feel no glee, only justice. And sometimes, justice is quiet. They do not visit anymore. That's fine. I left my forgiveness in the courtroom, next to the verdict. They can claim it if they ever learn what the word means. But my granddaughter, Lily, she comes by. Every Thursday, she bakes. She tells me about college. She says, "Grandma, you're my favorite rebel." I let her say that. I like how it feels. Once a month I still speak, in small rooms, libraries, nursing homes. I do not raise my voice. I just tell the truth. I show my scars, some visible, some not. I talk about remembering names, remembering bruises, remembering who we used to be before someone told us we were just old. I still wear the blue cardigan Henry gave me on our 40th anniversary. I keep his photo on the kitchen counter. When the sunlight hits it just right, it looks like he's winking at me. My life after the storm isn't glamorous, but it is mine. And it is lived with clarity. Some nights I sit on the porch, the dog curled beside me, and I think about what I kept. Not just money, not just a name, but the right to be seen. They tried to erase me. I wrote myself back in. I remember, and I am still here. Thank you for staying with me through every step, every bruise, every whispered word of this story. If you felt seen in my silence, if you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or told you were too old to remember, I hope this reminded you of one simple truth. We do not forget who we are. And when we rise, we do not rise alone. We rise for every voice that was quieted, for every room we were pushed out of. And if you want more stories like this, true stories of dignity reclaimed, of justice served slow but strong, of grandmothers who did not fade away, subscribe now to Grandma True Stories. Because silence is not the end. It is just the moment before we speak. See you on the next porch.